Amensol's Shadow, The Fox and the Wolf, the finale. Smoke and sand everywhere. It made each breath hurt. 2 cubits ahead was hard to see. 3 cubits ahead was completely lost in the slurry. And the lightning and thunder came from seemingly all directions. Indistinct voices carried through the dark and stinging wind, roaring through. Then a reply. Some were rage-filled battle cries, and some were boisterous arcane incantations that rode on the air itself. White and yellow light tried to push its way through the darkness, as heat lightning shone dimly through the veil of thick cloud. The light had a hard time pushing through, but the shockwave was enough to make every step unsure. Avendir led the way through the smoke and wind, slowly and carefully, following the sounds of war while watching for dangers one step at a time. There were boulders that had been thrown loose from the high cliffs surrounding the entrance to the sanctum, broken and flung by the awesome forces of the Sons of Terminus and of the High Immortal Asari. It made it hard to walk straight in any direction without stumbling over something. The voices on the wind and the constant flashes of light and flame spoke of the ensuing battle between them, and Avendir meant to join it. This war had been costly to the race of men, and he was set that men would see it finished. Cole had hid himself behind Avendir, stepping where he stepped, moving where he moved. He wished he could run from this place, but his fear kept him between Avendir, King of Men, and Aliston, the head cleric and now default commander of the armies of men and elves. There was nowhere so terrifying, but nowhere felt as safe. His foot slipped on the rocky terrain, and a familiar hand gripped the back of his vest and steadied him. The comfort of Aliston's steady hand settled his nerves, even if slightly. Aliston's left hand gripped the mace he had scavenged from the battlefield. The rush to greet Asari a couple hours earlier felt like a lifetime ago. He had not taken the time to gather his gear from his quarters before heading out to the battlefield. His constant need to advise and strategize had kept him out of the regular combat, especially since the fall of Amensol, and he felt almost a relief being back in a situation with his fate squarely in his hands. He dreaded the fight before them, being so weak in comparison to the supernatural beings they were going out to meet. But there was no other choice at this point. He had to come watch over Cole. But the closer he got, the more he felt drawn to it, and his left hand slid down his weapon. His right hand pinned invisible symbols in the air as he recited a prayer of protection. A faint aura glowed around the party for a brief moment. He noticed Cole and Avendir calm a bit and quickened their pace at the newfound vigor. Then he began a new recitation as they continued closer to the epicenter. The force of a breaking wave blew the party off their feet as heat and light filled the air around them. Aliston looked panicked as his hand searched the ground for the weapon that had fallen from it. They were still recovering as a body rose from a crater beside them. It was the fire-wielding monk wizard, picking himself up from a brutal strike that would have killed any mortal man. "King of Men, stay back, this battle is beyond your abilities," shouted the wizard through the storm. The sun was already beyond the horizon, and the air was thick, but his skin glowed bright like flame and made him the most visible object through the storm. The wizard turned back toward them before leaping back into battle. "I will not spare wrath for your safety. You must stay here." He crouched low, then burst upward with the force of a meteor and disappeared into the storm. "We press on!" Avendir shouted back to his companions, and received a stern nod of approval from Aliston. Following the cries of the 3 powerful beings brought them into the eye of the storm. The sand and ash that had been swirling began to dissipate, although the wind was still swirling around them. They felt tremors in the ground beneath their feet that seemed to fall in line with the large thunderclaps and sounds of explosions. As the air cleared further, the 3 finally caught a glimpse of the battle taking place. The female war wizard was staying on the move from ledge to ledge against the cliff walls, keeping Asari moving as she called down lightning from the sky. The storm encircling them seemed to emanate from her. Her magic was stronger than anything Alastin had ever seen. It was enough to keep Asari on the move as well. He seemed to almost teleport from one location to the next, able to move faster than the eye could process. He took his opportunities at both wizards, as he was able, nimbly guarding against the powerful magic of the elven female while focusing much of his effort on the monk. He charged the monk again with blinding speed and was rebuffed immediately. The monk had no need of that speed. He was ready for Asari's next move before it ever came. The instant Asari slowed after delivering a blow left a window to attack before he recovered to move again. The monk spun and placed his heel against the back of Asari's ribs. The armor absorbed much of the blow, but it was evident from Asari's grimace that he could not withstand that forever. Avendir watched the commotion for a moment while crafting his plan of attack. He looked around the tornado-encased arena and spotted a boulder lying near the action. That was enough, he thought. Avendir wasted no time, sprinting into the fray in a line straight for the boulder. Cole felt exposed as Avendir left his side, and he quickly jumped out after him, but was choked by his own collar as Alastin reached out and grabbed him at his nape. He pulled him back hard, rougher than Cole ever remembered Alastin acting with him. He landed on the ground at Alastin's feet. Alastin was not in the mood for squabbling about what Cole could or could not do. It was time to do as he was told. Alastin focused his attention on the strategy in play here. Avendir was obviously trying to get close enough to the fight to have a shot at passing Asari, if he could keep out of his line of sight. He could help increase the chance and counter by driving Asari in that direction. Alastin turned quickly toward Cole. Cole, you stay as far from combat as you can. I'm keeping one eye on you as I fight, and I can't afford to get you in harm's way. Understand? He asked directly. Cole nodded without saying a word. He looked up at Alastin, searching his eyes for comfort. But there was none. There was only war. Moving forward toward the fight, Alastin began reciting his prayers as he gestured with his hands as if he was pulling power down from the sky. His voice climaxed at the end of the prayer, and his hands swooped down. An invisible force smote the ground in front of Asari, blowing rocks and debris everywhere. Asari looked up and saw Alastin poised to join the fight. He snarled under his helmet, but his mannerism spoke clearly to Alastin that his presence was not welcomed here. Alastin was already reciting again. He picked a point halfway between he and Asari. Asari charged in Alastin's direction just as Alastin dropped his hand again. The explosion hit 2 cubits in front of Asari. Ugh, too far, Alastin thought. But Asari, noticing the obstacles in his way, decided to move laterally. The war wizard caught up with him and threw several glancing blows on Asari as he parried. Asari swung his sword around, trying to interrupt the offensive move. The monk jumped back from the swing, giving Asari enough time to create more space between them. He set his focus back on Alastin and moved further to his side. Alastin again brought his hand down as the ground was smitten again just in front of Asari, causing him to stumble backwards. A loud boom followed a lightning strike just to his side, which pushed him back further still. Asari seethed in his frustration and beat his chest as he let out a deafening roar. Alastin winced at the sound carried over the top of the noise of the wind and storm. There was just enough light given off by the war wizards to see the silhouettes of each person, but the light outside had faded, and it was getting harder to see clearly. Asari beat his sword on the shield as he taunted Alastin to come face him. Asari was pacing around to his left when his left knee went limp and a sharp pain shot up his spine as he collapsed down to one knee. Avendir circled around him and wiped the blood from his blade. Raindrops began falling on his head as he moved to look Asari eye to eye. Asari made no attempt to move, other than to check the back of his knee for the extent of his wound. He appeared comfortable, even in this moment of weakness. "Oh, a clever move, boy," Asari said, grinning. He winced slightly, shifting his weight to feel the extent of the injury. "There are weaknesses in any suit of armor. Am I right?" "Get away," shouted the monk. "We must finish this." Avendir didn't move. Alastin noticed the attack stop, as Avendir was right in the middle of the strike zone. Apparently, they would spare their wrath for Avendir, if not for his soldiers. Alastin looked back to check on Cole. Pale light hung in the cloud cover and rain and gave an ominous dark orange appearance to their field of battle. There was just enough light to see in the early night. He spun around, looking in all directions. Oh no, where is Cole? The elven war wizard cried out to a counterpart to finish the task, but he hesitated with Avendir, the king of men, in his way. They had been sent with a specific purpose, and interfering too greatly in the affairs of the mortals would be unwise. Asari rested his hands on his thigh, still down on one knee. You have any weaknesses in your armor, Avendir? Asari said slyly. Say, for instance, your father. Avendir tightened the grip on his sword. That is not my problem now. It is yours. I'm going to kill you on my father's behalf, and my people will enjoy an existence they have never known under you. Ah, I see. Revenge and bloodlust are noble aspirations for a ruler, of course. I'm glad you learned so well from your god. But be careful where you place your esteem. Many placed it on me, and see where it got them. Aliston started to panic. Cole was not behind him. He dared not call out for fear of breaking the focus of Avendir in such a volatile situation. It only takes a moment, as they learned, for Asari to snatch life from any man. Then something caught Aliston's attention out of the corner of his eye. A glint of metal peeked around the side of a loosened boulder in the distance between him and Avendir. He squinted his eyes and waited for another clue. No one is placing any esteem upon you now, you ruined and wretched mortal, Avendir said to Asari. He would see to it that Asari was abased before he took his life. My father was a better ruler than you ever were. He cared for his people, and you abandoned your duty for wrath and even greater power at the expense of your own legacy. My people will forget your name, but the name of Amensol will live forever. Asari chuckled lightly, looking straight at Avendir. He stopped for a moment and removed his helmet, unafraid of Avendir. Asari shook his long brown hair, and it settled like a mane around his shoulders. Avendir looked into his eyes for the first time. It was a green like the sea that seemed to be lit from the inside. It mesmerized him as he stared. Asari slightly shifted his weight as Avendir jerked his sword up on defense. Stupid mortal, Asari said. Your death won't be quick, like your foolish father's. No. I gave him what he wanted, silence. And I'll give you what you desire, blood. My father wanted peace and blessings for men. You prove your ignorance in every opportunity. Asari raised his voice. Your father didn't want peace. He wanted forgiveness, and chased it until his last breath. Avendir seemed caught off guard by this remark, which wasn't a sharp-tongued insult like he had expected. Oh, your father was haunted by his deceit. He told even his own family lies every day of his miserable rule. He didn't even bury his secret sins. He kept him close. Cole crouched low under the rubble, strewn across the battlefield. He couldn't see but a silhouette of Avendir and Asari, not 20 cubits off. A faint blue and red glow rested farther off in the distance, up in the sky where the frightening wizards were waiting. He couldn't stop breathing hard. The drops of rain pushed and pulled from his quivering lips. He was scared, but the thought of his mother never returning was a greater ache than the ache of death. He had to do something for her. It was what she would do for him. Yes, Avendir, son of Amensol, I believe you know of what I speak, Asari continued. It was the weakness in his armor. His lies were too inconvenient at first to be confessed, so he hid them. And then as time went on, the truth was too dangerous to be buried, so it had to be managed. Never able to admit it, and never able to let it go. He was in purgatory, and none of his deeds could free him. And you, the sniveling, lesser son of his great legacy, must be crowned to keep his better, stronger, smarter son a secret. You lie, coward! Avendir roared back. Did you know he abandoned his own bastard son and the child's mother? He fooled every pathetic human, raising himself from a manipulating tramp to a leader of men. The truth is, my creation made me sick to let the lowest form I created rule them. Order needed to be restored, and I certainly couldn't leave it to the second-rate son. Avendir had always known he was second-rate in his father's eyes, and he always told everyone that Hanai was like a brother to him, but Amensol had treated Hanai as his older brother. The words of Asari spoke were true, but his heart had never put them so plainly. Avendir had chased his father's approval and recognition all of his life, but always felt he fell short of the long shadow cast by his closest friend, Hanai. And after he was martyred saving Avendir's life, people would never stop talking about him until his actions could eclipse such deeds. He had spent his life chasing accomplishments, to prove his worth to his father, and to live up to his legacy. If it was true that Hanai was his half-brother, as he suspected that it was, then he had an obligation to live up to Hanai's legacy as well. Either way, Asari must die, and no one was going to kill him but Avendir. And now, Asari stood ever so slowly and gently, as Avendir stayed locked in his captivating stare with his sword drawn. You come to grips with yourself. Unwanted, second best, lacking. Asari saw his words hitting Avendir like daggers. You do not deserve to rule. Your family does not deserve to rule. And when the others find out, when the boy finds out, you will be cast into outer darkness, and the House of Amensol will burn to ash. This is enough. We must act now. The monk looked at the elven wizard. She agreed. The time was now. He shot off toward the showdown to catch Asari while he was still recovering, and Avendir would pay whatever price came with his petty revenge. The House of Amensol will live on. I swear it. Avendir hissed, his hatred and rage burning through his body at this attack on his family, his king, his people. Asari would die by his hand, and then he would know who the real ruler of men was. A sound caught his attention from behind, and he turned. The monk was charging through the rain, ready to finish this fight with the High Immortal Asari. Avendir stepped in front. This is my fight, not yours, Avendir shouted as he threw his shoulder into the monk, throwing him slightly off balance as the sun pushed through the collision toward Asari. His fist missed Asari's uncovered face by a sliver, and Asari brought his sword up, glancing it off the ribs of the war wizard, spilling hot blood to the ground. The monk cried out as he grabbed his ribs, and the other wizard placed a lightning strike directly between Asari and his companion, knocking them both apart. Avendir lay on the ground after taking a blow from the immovable monk, and from his slight dazed state, he looked up just in time to see a figure splashing through the rain toward an off-balance Asari. The figure leapt in the air and was lost in the shadow of the large warrior. Asari yelled out loud as pain shot through his shoulder. A blade had found the crease and made its way into his body. He turned his head painfully to see a small hand grabbing the handle of a dagger that was protruding from the top of his right shoulder. He was dumbfounded for a second at the sight. He turned his body to reach the small boy attached to the handle. Cole hung for dear life, his tears mixed with the rain and mud on his face as he held his hands on the blade of his father, sticking nearly halfway to the hilt into Asari's shoulder. He screamed through his terror, and eager as he hung there by one hand. Avendir reflexively bounded to his feet with the sword ready. This was his moment in the confusion. He raised his blade as Asari turned his body and revealed Cole hanging by one arm to the knife. Cole was in between them. There was no stopping now. Cole felt water splashing on his body, but not his face. Something was over top of him. His eyes were closed. He dared not open them for fear of Asari. He felt arms reach under him and pull him into a body. A voice that was familiar to him was shouting, then calling his name. Cole! Cole! Aliston yelled, only inches from the boy's face. Son, speak to me! Cole! His right hand stretched down and grabbed the boy's arm as he began reciting a prayer of healing. Blood was still seeping through the wound, running down to the bone and muscle, and into the clothes of Aliston. The boy's severed hand, sliced up past his wrist, was laying, unmoving, a few feet away. Aliston, watch out for Asari. Cole said, still keeping his eyes closed. Asari's body laid at the feet of the two war wizards and Avendir. His head lay next to it, covered in the mud into which it had fallen. Avendir still clenched his sword tightly, his knuckles white and his face tensed up in anger and spite. He spit onto the removed head of the fallen high mortal. The monk spoke up. "Let us go drive the enemy back with the head of their fallen leader. This battle must end soon. Waste no time here," he said, grabbing Avendir's arm, waking him from his fixation. Avendir looked at him, almost like a child looking for affirmation, and nodded his head in silence and followed them back to the battle in progress near the eastern side of the walls of the Silent Sanctum. Aliston watched Avendir as he and the war wizards raced past him back towards the battle. He looked back down at Cole. "Cole, it's okay," Aliston said, much quieter now. He stroked the boy's face as he held him halfway in his lap. The healing spell had slowed the blood loss, but it needed additional medical attention. He ripped the sleeve from his shirt, his dark brown skin almost disappearing into the night. He wrapped the sleeve around the boy's wound before the boy regained his senses. He had to get him back to the doctors at the sanctum while Cole was still docile. This would not be easy for the boy, who had already lost so much. Aliston stood up from the wet mud, Cole in his arms, and carried him half a mile back to the entrance of the stronghold. The sun had dried up much of the rain that seemed only to fall over the battle the night before. It was past midday. Most had slept until nearly midday from the battle that raged well into the night. Bodies of men were piled near gate entrances, mostly in the second-level walls. The bodies of the revenant horde were strewn everywhere, from the gates all the way to the charred ash pits where Havensong once stood. That is where the army led by King Avendir and the Sons of Terminus stopped pursuing their foes and finally returned triumphantly back to the Silent Sanctum with the head of Asari, once famed god of men, in the clutches of the king's hand. His body had been carried out to Havensong and burnt in the ashes of the city. There was a feast being prepared with the finest of the rations, now that their days in the sanctum were numbered. The war wizards had left unceremoniously the night before, after escorting the army back to the sanctum. They gave no words to Avendir, except for saying that he had done their part, for now. The monk's sliced side remained untreated, but seemed not to concern him. They left the same way they had come, bursting through the clouds in a fiery blaze until out of sight altogether. Avendir had turned to the army, silent for a long moment, and held up the head of Asari and cried, "Tomorrow we feast!" at the cheer of the crowd. And so, in the morning, those who had sheltered in place during the battle woke to the pain of loss and the bittersweet victory, and a new hope for the future that had eluded them since before leaving Havensong and the death of their king. Avendir, slayer of gods, had conquered their enemy with the help of the Sons of Terminus, and this hope had overshadowed the mourning of their departed brothers, sisters, and friends, and the feast would be to honor all of them. "I'm not going," Aliston said, not turning around to face the doorway where Lorne stood. He was watching over Cole, barely taking his eyes off him the entire night. Lorne, the acting general of the army, was frustrated at Aliston's defiant attitude. "Aliston, the men want to recognize their leaders. You are the general of the triumphant army." "Congratulations, Lorne. You are now officially the general. Comfort the men for me," Aliston replied. "What am I supposed to tell the king? You know he'll ask me where you are. He'll want you to say something. Aliston, the people all look up to you." "First," Aliston picked his head up slightly, "he is not my king. I'm done propping up men not worthy of their positions. And second, Aliston, pull yourself together," Lorne said, looking over his shoulder down the hall for any eavesdroppers. He pulled the door shut behind him just in case. "It couldn't have been as bad as you say. It's just the raw nerves after a tough battle. We've all been through them many times." "I know what battle feels like, Lorne." Aliston tried not to raise his voice while the boy was sleeping. "I'm not stupid, and I'm not losing my nerve or anything like that." He cut the arm off a small boy because of his uncontrollable bloodlust and need for revenge. He could have stopped. He just didn't care. You know, just like any military leader, that you can't just make judgment calls about other soldiers' actions in the fog of war. You don't know his calculations during that moment, and you can't understand the... Alliston stood up from his chair and turned and moved quickly across the room to the face of Lorne. You don't understand. I've been told long enough that I'm not going along with the mainstream ideas that move us along like sheep to the springtime slaughter. Alliston backed up, trying to calm down. I've given my entire life here, in Terminus, to Amensol, a man who lived each day trying to prove he was worthy of being called king, pushing battles to their breaking point, sending countless lives to their deaths to have one more victory, one more statue erected to his honor, one more quarry to build his empire, one more log mill to build another hall. Alliston, all of those help us, help our people. He didn't do it for us. That's the whole illusion. These things aren't done to further the standing of men. They were done solely for his ego, so he could prove he was a great king. He never thought about us. You, me, Hanai, Huggrith, Corinna. We were his minions, set out to prop him up to the masses. We were children, Lorne. He used us. And he twisted his own son up so much that he will do whatever, sacrifice whatever, to keep his father's legacy in place. Nothing is too pure or sacred to be spared in order to toe the line for the House of Amensol. By the gods, his own hubris got him killed right in front of everyone. And Avendir talks like it was some noble gesture to save us all, like his father could have killed Asari all by himself. It was Corinna's sacrifice for us, and he wasted it. If Amensol would have listened to Corinna and I back in Havensong, we would have twice the army remaining as we do here in the Sanctum. He needed war, and he needed us to sell it to the masses. Well, their death are on our hands now. Lorne stared at the floor while being scolded by his longtime friend. Alliston had always been reserved in his judgment of leadership and in his counsel. This was a different Alliston that spoke to him now. I'm tired, Lorne, Alliston said as he swung slowly back around to his chair by the bedside. He slumped down in it sideways so he could still see Lorne out of the corner of his eye. I'm so tired of holding these unworthy men up, of dragging folks along. I know how Hanai felt. He was really the best of us in every sense. He knew that this was a necessary evil to an extent, to give people something to believe in. But he understood the facade, the arrogant lies we tell to get people to believe in it. I would have followed Hanai into any battle he deemed worthy, because I knew that he knew not all of them were. I can't do that for Avendir. I won't do that to the people. Lorne looked up at Alliston, staying silent. I must decrease. Understand? Alliston looked over at Lorne. Lorne shook his head with a look of sadness on his face. Lorne, I will miss our battle rhythm. You are one of the finest men I've ever had the pleasure of working with. And I remain your servant forever, sir, Lorne said back, placing his hand over his heart. He hesitated for a second at the door, implanting the memory deep, then walked through the door of Alliston's quarters and down the hall to the feast. Alliston turned back to the boy, who was still lying asleep on his side. He stroked the boy's hair, then got up and began packing his belongings. Cole left his eyes shut. He knew Alliston didn't like him to hear the disagreements between the leaders. He looked down at his very sore arm, where his hand used to be, and the thought about everything he heard, about his once great friend, Avendir, King of Men. Avendir smiled and laughed, sitting at a banquet table with the men. He looked around. Even in the midst of the loss, there was cheer on their faces. He knew more would be required of them, but they needed this revelry. He saw Lorne making his way to his seat a couple tables away and caught his eye. He flipped his hand toward himself, trying nonchalantly to motion Lorne over. "Ah, my king," Lorne said, smiling. "Have you seen Alliston? Everyone is asking for him. After all, he's a hero now," Avendir said, smiling back. Lorne's face lost its smile as he searched for words he felt comfortable saying to his king. Alliston regretted that he had a lot to do this evening and wouldn't be able to make it, he said. hoping there was enough truth in there to suffice. Avendir paused for a moment, calculating all the in-between lines. He finally spoke up. He's leaving. The abruptness of his words startled Lorne for a second, completely giving away to the truth. Lorne nodded, and Avendir sat quietly doing more calculations. Alastin was a good warrior, a good man, and he would be missed greatly. On the other hand, he was short-sighted, and Avendir had less need for advisors that did not agree with his philosophy. And then there was Cole, the boy of Corinna, his one and only love. If anyone were to find out that Cole was also an heir to the throne, that would cause a great amount of intrigue and drama that would not be helpful in a time like this. It would be better if that information was left in the shadows. Yes, much better for the kingdom. Let him go, Avendir finally spoke up. Lorne nodded slightly, showing his sorrow on his face. But make sure he is taken care of, and has all he needs. Tomorrow, we need to sit and discuss next steps. The Ravaging Lord will not let this go unanswered, and we may need to join the other 4 races. I'm sure ours can be an example to rally forces, now that we know that they can be defeated. It's time for us to make our mark on this world. The king stood up, inspired by his own words. To victory! He shouted while shooting out of his chair, raising his cup, and the great hall of men and elves erupted in cheers. The next spring brought a quiet planting season. Many of the men were traveling half a world away, fighting to crush the Ravaging Lord and his revenant army. Alastin received words while out tending to Corinna's family's estate, since the boy was the last remaining heir to the property, and it was far from the politics of the day. It helped that Avendir and a lot of the council were away. It allowed time for things to settle down here. Cole had taken to using his left hand quicker than he had thought he would. It made the inconvenient change of lifestyle less depressing. Alastin could tell he missed the busy lifestyle in the sanctum, but he could tell he also enjoyed the country. He was doing well on his riding, and learning to use a sword in his left hand. But he hated tilling the garden one-handed, and Alastin made him do a quarter of it while he took care of the rest. Alastin, come on. I'll do anything. Hey, I'll fetch the water. Actually, I already need you to do that. And I have to get this correspondence ready to go out to Lorne, Alastin said, smirking. But look on the bright side. I won't make you carry the bucket in both hands. Oh, you're just full of jokes today, Cole said, half playing and half irritated still at all the chores on such a great day outside. Hey, did you hear that the letter came yesterday from Lorne? Alastin asked. Cole didn't remember a rider coming yesterday. It came by a seal, and I notated it. I'm sure glad I took one of these seals last year after the elves made them. Alastin looked around for the note. Cole came over and stood beside him. Ah, here it is. Let's see. Lorne said that it had been 2 months since the great dragon had come out of the earth and eaten the Ravaging Lord, and half the men were still worried it would come back for them. He also said that he found out since the last correspondence that the war wizard that had died by the Ravaging Lord's hands had been the monk that was here. Oh, he was so powerful too, Cole said. Apparently, the wound from Asari never went away. And Avendir has been planning a new capital with the new council he established. It will be called Thronefast. Are you for real? Cole was off on a rampage. Alastin knew any news of Avendir was dangerous, but this kind of information usually set him off. He needed to hear it, though. He would soon enough. Why is he always using my mother's words as his own? Did he tell anyone that was my mother's idea? That she was always the one talking about keeping the throne fast, blah, blah, blah? You know how I feel about it, Alastin continued. But it will be out across the fjord on the coast of the Bethrel Sea, as far from the plains here as he can get, so don't worry. Also, those men who have been trekking down to the sea lately, they are recovering pieces of Havensong to build towers at the entrance and exit of the gap leading up to the northern coast. He's calling it Avendir's Pass, signifying the journey we take through life. Cole started up again, flailing his arms around. Why does he keep stealing all my mother's stuff? That stupid speech he gave after the battle was just a bunch of stuff I remember Mother saying all the time. He steals her ideas, her thoughts, and she never gets any credit. I know, boy, Alastin said. The truth was, Alliston despised it too. Corinna frequently related life to a trip through a winding mountain pass, and every time he heard those stories, it made him miss her more, and hate Avendir more. And he moved out here, south of Havensong, in the plains, to get away from the sanctum and all the folks that were still settled up around there until the king returned from battle. He wanted to be as far from the mix as possible. And it didn't help that even now, he had members of the council requesting his aid with different problems. So far, he had been able to elude doing any official work for anyone. And Cole wanted nothing to do with Avendir after using him and discarding him the way he had at the battle. The good news is that the remaining Revenant have fled now, and the war is basically over everywhere. Lorne said he met some crazy dwarves and drew you some pictures for when he's back. Also, the fishfolk left the council, and he hasn't seen any since, but he'll describe them to you personally. That's interesting, right? Alliston looked over at Cole. Cole had his head down, dropping his father's knife onto a block of firewood on the floor. Alliston walked over and put his hands around him. It doesn't seem fair, Alliston. We lost everything, and he gets everything. It's not fair. Alliston turned him around by his shoulders and sat him down in a chair. Let me tell you a story, Cole. Living in a little den, right down a little hole, lived a little orphan fox, a little sad and low. Little did he venture out, for big were dangers nigh, and just a little danger can and will make foxes die. As he gathered food nearby, not too far from his home, did stray a large and handsome wolf, looking for a bone. "Ho there," said the mighty wolf. The fox turned round in fear. "I'll not hurt you, little one. Pray, come and lend an ear. I'm looking for a little snack, not knowing this wood at all, and I fear my nose is much too big to sniff a snack that small. 'Twould be so kind if you assist, a poor lost hungry mutt, and help me get a little snack to satisfy my gut." "Well, I am afraid," said Little Fox. "I really am too small to wander in this scary wood without my maw and paw." "Pish and posh," replied the wolf. "You're very safe with me. What creature would make war against a wolf and fox party?" And so the fox went right along, his new friend now in front, and he sniffed out prey until they spied an angry elephant. And he did not see the little fox while huffing down the trail. Wolf saved the fox from angry stomps, but one stomp got his tail. "Oh, thank you, Wolf," said the fox. "You really are too kind." "'Tis nothing," winced the injured fox while tending his behind. Next came a vicious hissing snake, a boa on the hunt. The fox looked mighty tasty, yes, a mighty tasty lunch. And he swooped down low to grab the fox, but Wolf was too alert. He charged the snake with the long nose, and now it too was hurt. So with aching face and throbbing tail, the wolf adventured more. The little fox was thankful so for all he'd done before. The fox now smelled a great new scent. A goose was in the land. "Follow me," said Fox with glee, and Wolf stayed close at hand. The little fox chased down the scent. It came from in a cave. So strange a goose would venture here. Now this would be its grave. He found the goose already dead, cleaned and on a plate. "Ah, you found it! Good for you! And not 1 minute late." "Wait, this is your dinner, sir? Why take all this abuse?" "Oh, I always have a side of fox whenever I have goose. Gulp." Cole stared at Alliston for a second. Alliston finally spoke up. "Do you know what this parable means, Cole?" "It means that when we live in a world full of violence and fear, no deceit goes unrewarded and no good deed goes unpunished. So if you can't live in a peaceful world, at least never trust anyone looking for something to kill." Cole thought back to his time with Avendir. He understood a little bit of what Alliston was saying, how he had been led away by enticing things that were beyond his comprehension to begin with. "I don't want to get fooled by anyone ever again, Alliston. I swear, I'm never gonna let anyone lie to me again." Cole got up and grabbed his knife and began fiddling with it again. He headed out to take care of his chores. Alliston felt bad for him. He had been through more than any child should, and the scars may never go away. All Alliston could do is teach him about the real world and how to maneuver it. He came from good stock. He'd be all right. Hey, Cole. Just got to be a more sly fox is all, Alliston quipped, trying to lighten his mood. Cole heard Alliston as he shuffled outside. He tossed his knife around in his left hand for a second, then grabbed it by the end of the grip and threw it the length of their cottage into a fence post, square in the middle. Cole mumbled to himself, "Or just be a wolf."